Welcome, fifth graders, to day 4 of Inferential Thinking. And today we're going to be looking at Mount Everest. Well, we're not going to be looking at Mount Everest because that would involve a flight across the world, but it would be completely awesome. But that's not what we're going to be doing. We're going to be reading about Mount Everest. I guess there's a picture of Mount Everest, so I guess you could look at it. But anyways, today's learning targets. Today, you will learn strategies for analyzing questions and finding answers, clues, and evidence. You will make inferences using evidence in the text. You will answer text-dependent make inferences questions. And finally, you will use academic vocabulary to discuss strategies. Now, when we talk about inferences, and one of the strategies that good readers do, they make inferences, and they make inferences all the time. But good readers use clues and evidence in the text to determine what the author is suggesting without directly stating it. So the author gives us hints, and we have to take those hints and we read them and we put them together with our background knowledge and information that we already have, and then we kind of come up with an inference, something that we think is going to happen or something that we believe is to be true. Okay? And remember, not all of our inferences are always correct. We talked about that last time. All right, some prompts that we can talk about. We worked with some different prompts before, but to help you make inferences, you can say, what can you infer? What can you infer from this section, from this paragraph? Which sentence from the text shows you that whatever your inference is, and what clues help you figure out what is happening? And that's that important part in terms of, and when we've talked in our guided reading groups and we've answered questions, that not only do we answer the questions, but we have to use the text, and we use clues, and we use specific parts of the text to back up what we say. And we have to prove things. And that's one of the things we've been working on so far this year. All right, so here we have climbing Mount Everest. Okay, if you notice right here we have Mount Everest. And this, so I'll read this. Reaching the peak of Mount Everest is not easy. Climbers face bitter cold winds while trekking through heavy snow. Deep crevices in the ice open and close all the time, making the climb very dangerous. Then there is the blowing snow, which makes it difficult to see. Powerful winds have actually blown climbers right off the mountainside. Avalanches moving at speeds of 200 miles an hour, which would be 322 kilometers per hour, are the biggest killers of all. At the top of Everest, there is only 1/3 as much oxygen as at sea level. Most, but not all, climbers need extra oxygen. Upon reaching the summit, climbers can stay for only a few moments. If they stay longer, the lack of oxygen can weaken them, making the trek down difficult. Okay, so this is our article, and this is kind of what we're looking at. And sometimes you need to answer questions about a passage you've read. Some questions require you to make inferences. Today we're going to read and answer questions. Some of the questions will require you to make inferences. So now let's go to our questions here. Climbing Mount Everest, okay? And you have this handout. This is your next handout in your packet. And let's look at question 1. Why is reaching the peak of Mount Everest not easy? We have 4 choices. A, bitter cold winds. B, heavy snow. C, deep crevices in ice, or D, all of the above. So the question, what is the question asking us to do? Okay, is the question asking us to identify a sequence? No, it's not saying what comes first or second or last. Is it asking us to summarize? No, it's not asking for the main idea. It's not asking us, what is the gist of this paragraph or whatever. So what strategy do we need? Well, the strategy we need is we need to make an inference. And how do we know we need to make an inference? Because it doesn't say in this article, what makes it what makes it, that relationship is not explicitly stated in the text. They don't say it's not easy because of A, B, C, or D. Okay? But what we have to do is we have to make connections and figure out why it's not easy. So to make an inference that answers this question, I will need to look for clues and evidence in the passage about the topic. What words in the question help me? Well, if I look here, I have the peak of Mount Everest, which is important. Okay? So now we're ready to reread the passage to find the information we need. Let's go back. We need evidence to make an inference about why it isn't easy to reach the peak of Mount Everest. I see the words peak and Mount Everest in the first sentence, so I look carefully at the next sentences. The second sentence talks about bitter cold winds, trekking through heavy snow. The next sentence, deep crevices in the open ice, open and close all the time. Okay, so these are kind of supporting details that would make reaching the peak of Mount Everest not very easy. I found evidence to my inference that when we look at it, what's the relationship? Well, it's not just the bitter cold winds. It's not just the heavy snow. Okay? It's not just the deep crevices and ice. The answer is a combination of all of these. So the answer must be all of the above, and that answer makes sense. So I'm going to go with D. So as we look through this, ladies and gentlemen, we want to look and see, what is the question asking us to do? What skill do we need? So far we've worked on sequencing, we've worked on main idea, we've worked on inferencing. Now, sometimes it might be neither, okay? Oftentimes these questions when we talk about thick and thin questions, some of these questions are thin questions that we can just look in the book and look in the article, but others are going to be a little bit more thinking involved, and hopefully you'll be able to make those connections. So your job, ladies and gentlemen, is when you're done watching the video, is to just reread the article here, and if you need to, you can rewind and listen to me read it. And then you need to complete the questions responses for 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I don't have a picture of 3 and 4 just because I wanted to make this large enough. Otherwise, when I took a picture of the whole quiz, it got really small. So that wasn't going to help us. But now let's talk about some inferences that you could make from this article. So I'm going to give you some evidence, and I want you to see if you can come up with an inference. Okay? Evidence. Climbers trek through heavy snow. At the top of Mount Everest, there is only 1/3 as much oxygen as at sea level. So what would you think would be an inference? Why don't you pause the video and just kind of jot it down in the margin or on the back of one of the sheets to figure out what your inference is. And when you are done, restart the video and to see if yours match mine. The inference for this is climbers must be in excellent physical condition to climb Mount Everest, because you don't have as much oxygen. It's like when you run out and all of a sudden you know how your side hurts, or you're panting because you can't breathe because you don't have enough oxygen. Oxygen helps your muscles. Oxygen helps your brain. You need oxygen to be successful. So if you only have 1/3 as much oxygen, you need to be physically fit. You can't just sit and eat hot Cheetos and play video games. You're going to need to have exercise and everything beforehand. When I was in college, one of my friend's dads was going to climb Mount Everest, and he was training for a year. And luckily he lived in Colorado, so he spent a lot of time in the mountains, so he got used to working with less oxygen. Okay, so let's look at another inference, another bit of evidence. Evidence is most climbers need extra oxygen. The lack of oxygen can weaken climbers if they stay too long at the summit. So what inference can you make from this evidence? Why don't you pause the video, write it down, and then when you're ready, restart the video and check and see if yours is similar to mine. All right, hopefully you have something written down. And the inference I came up with, or the book came up with, climbers who don't exercise good judgment could lose their lives. Okay? And that the lack of oxygen, what happens is when you have a lack of oxygen, your brain kind of starts getting cloudy and it doesn't start thinking, you don't think as well. And you start, I think it's called, the oxygen deprivation is something called some sort of edema or something. And basically what happens is your brain starts to hallucinate and it starts thinking things that aren't true. So, there's been stories about people on Mount Everest where they've just started walking and they thought that there was a path and they've walked right off of a cliff because they thought they saw something. Or they've been sitting there and for some reason their brain starts telling them, because it's not thinking very clearly, that they're getting hot. So they start taking off their jackets and all the bundles they're wearing, and then they end up freezing to death because they don't know. Their brain isn't thinking clearly. So it's very important that when you're up there and when you are climbing, that um, you do use good judgment. Otherwise, if you don't, you could die. And people have died because they've tried to overdo it and they tried to go too quickly and they, have not used extra oxygen. Okay? So, in conclusion, when we look at inferencing, authors do not always tell readers everything. Okay? Otherwise, books would be so incredibly long. And they want you to do some of the work. Okay? But so they include clues that help lead you in a direction. Okay? And inference is based on one or two clues in the text plus the background knowledge, the knowledge that you bring into the book. Okay? To make an inference means to figure out something that is not stated directly in a text, something that the author doesn't say. It's something that is hinted at, and you have to collect things and put them together. And making inferences helps you make sense of a text and think about what the author is communicating. And it's one of those things that we do all the time. And it's very important to really fully understand. Okay? Inferential thinking is adding up clues within the text, combining them with personal knowledge to understand what is not being said. And remember, good readers know how to make inferences when they are reading both fiction and nonfiction texts. It's something that we do all the time. We are always making inferences. When we're looking at people's faces, that's what the first activity. And then we're reading between the lines in the fiction text when we talked about pirates. And yesterday when we were working with stars. Okay? It's something we are constantly doing. All right. Thank you.